Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about vulnerability management. I'm your host, Stephen, the PK tracer or the packet tracer, whichever way you want to talk about it. So let's begin. So what is vulnerability management? That is a very good question. Now, if you're watching this video, I'm assuming that you have some form of interest in IT or cybersecurity. So you're not necessarily a beginner, but you perhaps don't have the skills or experience or the mentorship to really put a face to a name when it comes to some of the concepts that you might have heard about or discussed. And so I'm hoping to be able to help you with that within these videos, and perhaps we can shed some light on some things that you might have already covered but just need a bit more information on. Vulnerability management, where do I begin? Let's say we work for a corporation. Let's say we do. And hopefully, I'm going to nail the drawing of this. Hopefully it knows what I'm talking about. Yeah, there we go. Let's say we work for a hospital. Yeah, perfect. So we work for a hospital. I mean, why not? Nothing wrong with that. And first of all, I should probably talk about the conceptual side of vulnerability management. Yeah, let's do that first. We'll put this aside for now. We're still working at the hospital, but we'll talk about the conceptual side first. First of all, what is vulnerability management? So vulnerability management, in every company that you have here, by getting into the details of the inner workings of it, you will find that there will be many different bits of technology which are in use. Yeah, there we are. This is my favorite image for the server. Various bits of technology which are in use, and these can be anything, not necessarily servers. These can be literally any sort of IT asset within the company. And so they can also, if you're familiar with Cisco concepts, or if you've ever used packet tracer, hence the name, though not necessarily the reason for the name, then you might be familiar with this little symbol here. I don't think I'm going to find it. This would be close enough. No, that's not close enough. We can do better than that. Little Pringles can. Where can I find that? You're going to give it to me? Nope. Yeah, I'll do. There we go. We've got a ruler. It's probably the best one I found, actually. There we go. Nice little tin of tuna or whatever the hell that's supposed to be. We got some routers as well. We got some networking equipment, and we have servers. The vulnerability management is a very key component to dealing with the issue of potential hacks, vulnerabilities, threats, etc., which you might find within an organization, or many organizations, not necessarily one. You'll have various different bits of kits, you'll have laptops, you'll have PCs, etc. I'm not going to spend too much more time on this because it's just going to take forever. There we are, got some laptops. So you get the picture. We got assets here. And we want to protect these. We don't want people hacking our systems or using ransomware, or off the top of my head, installing any malware or phishing anyone. We don't want that. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that systematically we are protecting all of the assets within our company. And it's fine if you've got a very small amount of kit, in your own home, small home office, local area network, etc. You're not going to really have too many concerns. I mean, if your PC basically blows up, then you just go out and buy another one, not a massive issue. But when it comes to a corporate environment, or perhaps not even a corporate environment, but an environment nonetheless, although I'd say it's reserved more for the larger environments rather than the smaller environments. You're going to need a systematic approach to dealing with vulnerabilities, just because we've got so many assets here. This alone here is a lot of assets, to be honest. But you're talking hundreds of servers, you're talking thousands upon thousands of user end devices, and then maybe a handful of networking equipment. But yeah, this is what you would need to be able to ensure the safety of the assets on a network. Don't necessarily want to delete these, but it's just going to get in the way. Keep them there for now. So you might be wondering to yourself, Stephen, I'm a hotshot, I know what I'm talking about. I'm a techie guy, I know what I'm doing, or gal, overall. And so obviously whenever you've got a patch, whenever you've got a vulnerability, all you need to do is just patch it. Really, voice guy? Well, let me tell you, right, if you've got a network like this, right here, very messy network, and it is possible that sometimes whenever networking devices, not specifically network devices, but whenever a end device receives an update or a patch to a specific sort of service, not necessarily the operating system, it may be the case that it will come along with some side effects or some issues to do with how it works with the hardware of the system, or how it works with newer pieces of software that are installed upon the system. I really should have some examples of this. But what can happen is sometimes is that it can cause some of them to break. And we don't want that, because it can affect service. And obviously if you've got something like, I'm not going to be able to draw this, let's pretend, let's say this is an oil rig. Oh, I don't know what an oil rig looks like, to be fair. I can't draw one. Let's assume that you've got an oil rig, or you've got some other sort of piece of technology that's supposed to be making money. I can't do this. We're not going to do this. But this is, I'll tell you what, close enough. Yeah, close enough. Let's pretend it's an oil rig. Yeah, wheel. So we have IoT, we have operational technology, like an oil rig, and this is a pump, and you'll have, and this is something called industrial control systems. I won't go too much into this, but I will give a bit of context. Industrial control systems, or ICS, and this is part of, I'm just going to clarify what this is here. This is an oil rig. But this could be many different pieces of machinery. It could even just be standard manufacturing machinery. But generally, I think that you would have the biggest risk. Well, it's anything that produces a product that makes money. Because if you're making money, the last thing you want is for that to stop, because then you can't pay for the business, the various areas of the business. Not to go too deep. So yeah, we've got an oil rig here. We would have industrial control systems in place, and another word to call that would be operational technology, or OT. So this is extremely important when dealing with these sorts of technologies, let's say. So we simply can't afford to just do a patch. It's not possible, because if, let's assume, I'm just going to start pulling out these examples here. Here's our oil rig, here's our networking equipment. I'm not going to get too granular because it will overcomplicate the video. So we've got our industrial control system. Here's an oil rig that's connected to whichever piece of technology controls one of them. Admittedly, I've never worked on one, but either way. And then we'll have the terminal, which will be used to control it. You might have a SCADA, which I'd need to clarify the name of that. A SCADA system, which collects various bits of data about this, which can be used for other areas of the business with the service. and all this is connected together. Now, if we have a vulnerability on one of our pieces of equipment over here, and let's draw a little bug. How the hell do you draw a bug? Just do a spider, because I don't know. Hopefully it gets the picture. Close enough. There we go. Let's pretend this is a bug or a virus or something. So if there's a bug on here, if there's a potential of a threat against the piece of technology, I'm going to throw an example right off the top of my head. Let's assume this is a Linux server. This is a Linux server. Let's say, I'm just throwing out names here, but this is a definite Linux distro. This is, let's say, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which is green. Whenever, we don't care. So this is a Linux server hosting Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and on this we're using some services on here which require, let's say, OpenSSH. Now, I won't go into the details of what OpenSSH is. It's basically a terminal platform that allows you to connect remotely. You could say from here, but I won't go too deep into the details. So I could connect from this laptop here via the command line onto this server, which is good. We want to do that because if we want to connect this, and let's say I'm not actually in the building, but I'm actually working from home in America, and this is over in France, it's going to be a bit tricky to make that journey, just to make a small change on there. So that's the logic behind that. So we've got an issue with OpenSSH. That's not good. We like it, OpenSSH. We want to be able to use these services. We can't necessarily just turn them off. We can't have them be vulnerable, because that means whether via a remote attack, let's assume that, you'll have to forgive me guys, I'm struggling to speak here, coughing up. Let's assume that we are somehow connected to the internet. So this is connected to the edge router, and the edge router is connected to let me get the cloud, the internet. Whoops. So this is connected to the internet, and it's red because, you know, the internet's evil in this particular case, because we don't want them hacking us. So yeah, the evil internet is going to start trying to hack us. So we don't like that, but we do like having OpenSSH because it's also secure as well, and it's encrypted. So we like that. So what do we do? Now, it may be the case that there are many services running on this machine. There's many different cases of, and sometimes it can be too much to get your head around. A lot of this comes with experience. It's not something you're probably going to know straight off the bat. Like if you're in a junior IT role, or even in a fairly intermediate IT role, it's not something that you're necessarily going to be exposed to or have much understanding. It's actually taken myself quite a bit of time to fully wrap my head around it, but this is the general gist of how it works with vulnerability management. So there may be many services here. There'll be many departments over here at our hospital. We'll have, I'm not going to go through many, but let's stick to the IT department specifically. So we won't worry about the other areas, but we're down here in the basement. Here we are. Here's the IT department. IT. Not one T, IT. IT, there we are. So there's us. And this is a big department. Let's say there are 400 people. Because why not? Generally, they are pretty big nowadays. So there's 400 people in the IT department. Perhaps more, perhaps less, not important. And they will be of various different departments. Like you are going to have your Software developers, that will be an entire department. That might even be split into many departments. You may have your web, that's probably good enough. Yeah, web, and maybe they handle different things. Just general software developers. Software developers, you'll have the database team, and they'll handle the database servers. Let's assume this one over here, just change its color to something that looks like a database color, pink. So database team, and yeah, it can get quite granular. It really depends on the company, to be honest. So database team, you have the network team, and all they do is work with networking equipment. So let's color these blue because that's a very Cisco color. There we go. We like having blue networking equipment. And I'm going to color these ones blue as well because it's worth it for context that everything that you see, in fact, I'm going to color these. You can turn this bleeding thing blue. It should be very set on being orange. Whatever, Gryffindor it is. Anyway, so each individual piece of kits that you see here will be dealt with by separate teams. It's not necessarily going to be dealt with by one team. So you will have the network team. Let's turn this blue. You have the network team who deal with the networking equipment. You will have the, let's assume this is a database. I don't know who would manage a SCADA system, so it would be the database team or the SQL team or whichever. And they're going to be pink because, sorry guys, you're pink. They're dealing with this. And then that would be dealt with by some other funky team. I don't even know, to be honest. Engineers, probably actual real engineers, not as fake ones. So oil rig. Then we can just forget about the other colours here, and then this is the IT department or some other engineer, etc. I'm going to have to make a whole video on the corporate structure or just an organizational structure when it comes to IT or technology departments, because it can get quite in depth. So there we have it. We've got several teams, and I'm not going to bother color code now. It's just going to take forever. But we know who's dealing with what now. So we've got software developers. They'll be doing some other bits, not necessarily with this. Although, now that I think about it, they may have built the program, so the software, either for the oil rig itself, whichever sort of terminal or controller is running on the oil rig, and that might be built in-house. I would say that's unlikely. I'm not particularly familiar with any bespoke technology or bespoke software that you would get for something like a ICS or OT machinery. Maybe something from Siemens or Mitsubishi or Toshiba, etc., something like that. I hope I get these companies right. But you would have the software team dealing with that specific piece of, I don't even know what color to give it. Let's make them yellow. Why not? You would have the software team dealing with that. Yeah. The dev team dealing with that. And they might also manage the piece of proprietary software developed for the SCADA system. Let's say they built the system that collects the data, which is then in use. So these departments, these all have their own responsibilities. So let's say for this specific issue here, so OpenSSH, is vulnerable, and we know this due to threat intelligence. And perhaps we have you most likely will have a platform such as Qualys or Tenable, which would be a vulnerability scanner. There are others, but they don't immediately come to mind. These are generally the most, don't want to get it wrong here. These are very nice tools. Let's say that. These are very nice tools. So worth knowing. So these tools have told us, and I can get into these another time. That will be for another video. Those tools have told us that there is an issue with OpenSSH. So there's a particular version of it, make up a random number, OpenSSH, the 1.8 because it's normally like this, 14, something like that. Version 8.14 is vulnerable to remote access, remote code execution, yeah. Not a rat, but remote code execution. Code execution, or RCE. And this will be the vulnerability software will categorize this based upon certain factors which determine the risk. Vulnerability management is not a particularly simple concept to discuss. It is something that will take a bit of time, so we can cover this in a different area, but we'll continue with this part for now. So just wondering how much to add to this. So in this particular case, we have OpenSSH, and this is vulnerable to remote code execution, which means that it's been determined through practice, through an exploit, a known exploit, that someone out here on the internet, someone, let's not make a comment, who's decided they wanted to hack us, has sent a crafted packet, let's say, which has managed to, and maybe they've taken ownership of one of these devices, and they're currently, they've already compromised one of these devices, and they managed to send a crafted packet over to the SQL database. And what's going to happen is that's going to cause this to trigger the vulnerability. So we don't want that to happen. So we have a few options of what we can do here. You might say, let's just patch it. As discussed earlier, it's not necessarily something we can do. The reason being is that if there are other parts of the business which are reliant on, let's say, the data from this machine, or the oil rig is reliant on this machine to work, or let's say there's other services on here like a web portal which for some reason gives up a bit, any sort of, this is why it's best to ask. So any sort of random occurrence, Murphy's Law and all that, which makes this a problem. So we can patch it, that's possible, but we need to make sure that it's not going to cause any disruption, because like some of the Windows updates that I've had in the past, if you update it and it knocks the device out, and let's say it no longer works with the graphics card, and so the screen doesn't work, etc., then eventually we have to roll it back, which is fine if you're at home and you just can't have that one game of Fortnite. But in a network, in a proper network, in a proper corporate environment, it's going to be a problem if the oil rig stops working and if people aren't able to do their work. So that's the issue with patching, but it is possible. And it would just be as, literally, in this case, it would be as simple. This is what makes vulnerability management slightly frustrating, to be honest. Simple as doing that. That's it. You just download the tarball, install the new version. There you go. No longer. And perhaps it's not 15. Perhaps you need to update it to a far newer version. So there's a certain set of versions of OpenSSH or of a different piece of software which are considered vulnerable. So we'd have to jump up to something like 8.20, or something that generally we don't want to do, but it's also possible, I think people are a little more reluctant to do this, jump up to version 9 or 10, version 10. But people would be reluctant to do this just because of the possibility of the issues that it can cause with either this device or other devices which are reliant on data from it or services from this. So we have patching. Let's get rid of some of these. We don't need this much. Move the ping server there. Get rid of this. I want to sell some of these devices because, save some money, economy and all that. So, options. What do we do? First of all, as stated, we can patch. It's possible. It is preferable as well, but it's not necessarily simple. Not as simple as it might appear at first. If we cannot patch, if there's not a version to patch to that's considered a safe version, if there's no possibility of, let's say, just off the top of my head, trust me on this, guys, if for some reason that we can't patch it just because there's dependencies with this and we have no expectation of what could happen if this goes down, this cannot turn off. If this turns off, if this oil rig turns off, the company will stand to lose, let's say, tens of thousands of dollars or pounds, or insert currency here, perhaps even more, perhaps even millions. So it's just not something possible. It may even not just be one. We may be talking about, a whole series of oil rigs or other pieces of machinery, and downtime can be catastrophic. So we don't want to do that. Well, we do, but we may not be able to do that. So what can we do? If we can't do that, do we just throw up our hands and say, well, we're vulnerable, nothing we can do? No, not necessarily. We can also do something known as a compensatory control. This is a different color, green. Compensatory controls, because I don't think one's generally enough, or measure, or remediation, etc. And what this might be is, if it's considered, I'm just coming up with ideas because there's many ways you can do this. In this particular case, let's assume that it's something different and we need to completely remove. Let's assume this here. This is a firewall, network firewall, because this has happened in the past. This is a network firewall. Now we're using something called let's say, adaptive security appliance. So an adaptive security appliance. And then let's say that this becomes obsolete. So we need to change the whole physical device itself. We can't change the software. The network team would need to be able to change the device itself. And there might be many reasons for that. It might not necessarily be down to vulnerability management or a issue with it. It might just be the case that it's too slow and outdated. It might just be really old and rusty or dusty. So we want to get rid of that. And so we completely remove the adaptive security appliance and we put something different in place. Let's say, my Cisco devices now. Let's say a Cisco Firepower firewall. And let's assume that in this particular instance, this is not vulnerable to this. It's stated in the threat intelligence that we've been given that the firewall is in fact, the firepower firewall is in fact not vulnerable, but the adaptive security appliance is. Let's say that. So we've completely removed that. In fact, we've ripped that out. That's gone. Oop. And we've now installed this new, shiny, better one. So there we are. That's actually a really good example. So we can replace or take offline. So we've completely removed it there, so we don't need to patch. It's just been switched. And that's not necessarily a change that you can make overnight. That would be something that would have to go through a whole process, but we won't go into that right now. And it might be the case that we can't necessarily patch it or take the device, so we can't decommission. Let's be thinking it. Decommission. Decom. There we are. Can't necessarily decommission. Decom. Because we still need it online. What we can do is we can choose to make other changes. So maybe we change the firewall rules. Maybe we decide that we no longer need SSH on there, which I suppose would be decommissioning, but this is to do with the software. So maybe we decide, this is how granular it can get. So maybe we decide we no longer need this, we no longer need SSH on there. We're going to use a different platform. We're going to just use RDP or something. God only knows why. And so now we've removed it. And so there's many different ways to be able to do this. So as you can see, guys, it is a pretty lengthy process. There are a lot of moving parts, literally a lot of moving parts to vulnerability management. And this is conceptual rather than anything specific, but it is something I'm looking to explore moving forward. And yeah, stay tuned. I will pick this up in the next video. Thank you ever so much for watching. If this has added value to you in any way, or perhaps you would like to know more, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you later. Take care. Bye-bye.